Hi everyone, this is going to be a great review for your quiz on Friday. I really suggest trying these problems on your own first and then using the video to see if you got them right. So I'm going to do the first problem two ways. They want to know which quadrant 4 pi over 5 is in. And if you draw out your quadrants, we start with 0 radians. We know half of a circle is pi radians. That means a full circle is 2 pi. A quarter circle is pi over 2. And then the guy down here would be 3 pi over 2. You really do have to remember 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Now, your goal is to figure out where does 4 pi over 5 fit in. And if I were you, I would think about 4/5. So if you use your calculator, 4/5 is 0.8. So we really have 0.8 pi radians. Now, 0.8 is less than 1 pi, and 0.8 pi is more than a half pi, because this pi over 2 is just a half of pi. So because 0.8 is in between a half and 1, you have to be in the second quadrant. If you don't like it like that, then you're going to have to convert to degrees. Because you are given radians, you are going to use the radian formula. And on your reference sheet, the radian formula says 1 radian equals 180 over pi degrees. The problem is that you don't have 1 radian, you have 4 pi over 5 radians. So we need to adjust this formula to fit what you need. And I'm going to multiply both sides by 4 pi over 5. Because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other as well. On the left side, 4 pi over 5 times 1 is just 4 pi over 5. On the right side, your pi's cancel out because you have a pi in the numerator and a pi in the denominator. So in your calculator, you're left with, put it in as a fraction with alpha y equals 4 over 5 times 180. And your calculator tells you that's 144 degrees. And we know 144 degrees is in between 90 degrees and 180 degrees, so that's still in quadrant 2. For number 2, they want you to express 120 degrees as in radians. So because you're given degrees, you are going to use the degree formula. If you went to your reference sheet and what you'll have on the quiz, it'll say 1 degree is equal to pi over 180 radians. Not dad, rad. Whoops. We don't have 1 degree, we have 120 of them. So you're going to multiply both sides by 120. On the left, 120 times 1 is 120 degrees. On the right, we have a bit of an issue. If you were to do 120 times pi over 180, you will get a decimal. You don't want a decimal. They say to leave it in terms of pi. This is another way of asking for exact value. And in order to do exact value, it means don't put pi in the calculator. So let's see what we're going to do in the calc instead. In the calculator, we have 120, but I'm not putting pi in the calculator. Instead, put a 1. So I have the same thing, but I left out the pi. I just put a 1 instead. If you were to do this in the calculator, I don't know. So let's find out. 120 times 1 over 180. You get 2/3. There we go. So the thing is, we didn't put pi in the calculator, so 2/3 is not your correct answer. You do have to adjust it to be a bit correct. And because you didn't put pi in the calculator, you do need to actually put pi in your answer. Now, pi was in the numerator, so you're going to put your answer in the numerator as well. And you're going to see that 120 degrees is equivalent to 2 pi over 3 radians. The next one is asking you which diagram shows an angle rotation of 1 radian. Now, people always like to choose choice 3, and I think I need a different color because purple's hard to see. I want to clarify that half of a circle is 1 pi radians, not 1 radian, it's pi radians. It's not choice 3. A full circle we know is 2 pi radians, not choice 4. Half of a circle, 90 degrees, is pi over 2. So it has to be choice 1. The reason why it's choice 1 is because you take the radius and you overlap it along the circle 1 time. These two pieces are congruent. That is the definition. This angle right here is the definition of 1 radian. But if you don't like that explanation, look at your reference sheet formula. For radians, it says 1 radian is equal to 180 over pi degrees. We have 1 radian. This is 1 radian. The question is, what is 180 over pi? I don't know. So you're going to go to your calculator, and 180 divided by pi is 57. So this is about 57 degrees. So 1 radian, it's about 57 degrees. And this looks like it's 57 degrees. This is 180 degrees. This is 90 degrees. This is 360. All right, got one more radian question. Figure out the angle whose measure is 2.5 radians. And they are telling you to round, so if needed, you're going to put pi in the calculator. You only put pi in the calculator if they tell you to round. So we have, because we're given radians, we use the radian formula. 1 radian is equal to 180 over pi degrees. We don't have 1 radian, we have 2.5 radians. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2.5. So 2.5 times 1 is 2.5 radians. On the left side, because they're telling you to round, put all of that in the calculator. We're going to have 2.5 times fraction 180 over pi. Maybe not like that. And you get 143.239 degrees. They told us to round to nearest tenth, so I'm just going to write 143.2. All right, for number 5, they want, first of all, let's see what it says. They want the value of cosecant. Cosecant starts with a C. If it starts with a C, then the reciprocal must start with a S. That means it's going to be sine. So if we can figure out what sine is, then we're just going to flip our answer to figure out cosecant. Because it says unit circle, and only when it says a unit circle, your radius is 1, which is also your hypotenuse. But they tell you that instead of x comma y, we're going to have cosine comma sine. So the x is your cosine, the y is the sine. And remember, they go in alphabetical order. X comes before y in the alphabet, and c comes before s in the alphabet. So really, this is cosine, and this is sine. And we wanted sine. So sine is -2 radical 2 over 3. That means cosecant, the reciprocal of sine, is going to be 3 over -2 radical 2. Moving on to the next one. Your Pythagorean identity is sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. These are the same variable. And if they're the same variable, they have to be the same value. In other words, if one is 58, then the other has to be 58 as well, or else the identity is not true. How much do I have left? Oh boy. Okay, moving on. Cosine is 7 over 25. There's two ways to do this problem. We're going to do it both ways. The first way is for my people who prefer triangles. If you prefer triangles, you're going to make yourself an XY axis, and you're going to figure out what quadrant you're in. So the thing is here is that cosine is a positive value. We have positive 7 over 25. Now cosine resembles x, so we're going to say that we have a positive x. Here they're saying sine is less than 0, which means that sine is negative. Now if sine is negative, sine is y, so we're going to have a negative y. If you think about your quadrants, what has a positive x value and a negative y value? That would be in quadrant 4. You have positive x because you're on the right, negative y because you're down below. And what you are going to do is you're going to create a triangle. I don't care where you put the point. Make some point in the 4th quadrant. Connect that point to the origin and to the x-axis. So your triangle should share a side with your x-axis. Theta is always at the origin. You have your hypotenuse. Opposite is on the other side of the theta, which would be here. And adjacent is next to theta. Adjacent's always on your x-axis, guys. Now, moving on, with SOHCAHTOA, we know cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent is 7, hypotenuse is 25. You do have to figure out your missing side, so you would have to do x squared plus 7 squared equals 25 squared. Specifically 25 because you're equal to the hypotenuse always. I don't know what 25 squared is. 625. Okay, we get 576. When you go take the square root of this, you need a plus or minus. So the square root of 576, let's hope it's actually an answer. Yes, we get 24. So you need to choose whether you're positive 24 or whether you're negative 24. And because we're going downwards, I'm specifically going to choose negative 24. Now, the goal was to find tangent. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So, tangent, your opposite is negative 24, your adjacent is 7. There you go. If you would prefer to do this with the Pythagorean identity, we could do that as well. That is just extra work. I'll go with black. The Pythagorean identity is sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. I don't know what sine is, but I do know cosine is 7 over 25. We want cosine squared, so you're going to square it. In your calculator, 7 squared is 49, and 25 squared is 625. When you subtract 49 over 625 from both sides, I would use your calculator to figure out what you get. And your calculator is going to tell you that you get 576 over 625. You're going to take the square root of both sides, and you get that sine of theta is plus or minus because you're taking the square root. The square root of 576 is 24. Square root of 625 is 25. But you need to figure out whether you choose the positive or the negative. So you need to know that we are in the third quadrant, which we talked about before. In the third quadrant, your y is negative, fourth quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, your y value is negative, and sine is y. So that means sine is negative as well. So once you actually figure out what sine is, you know that tangent is sine over cosine. We just figured out that sine was negative 24 over 25. And cosine, the problem told you, cosine was 7 over 25. Now, if you are dividing two fractions and your fractions have the same denominator, they go away. And you're going to be left with tangent equals negative 24 over 7, which was the same answer that we got by making a triangle. In the next problem, they're asking you for secant. So the reciprocal of secant has to start with a C. If you're starting with an S, the reciprocal has a C. It's always opposite letters. So my reciprocal is cosine of angle A. So I'm going to find cosine of angle A first. And we have to label our triangle. So I'm going to go to angle A. Your hypotenuse is on the other side of your right angle, which is 25. It's also the largest side, and 25 is the largest number. Adjacent means to be next to. So next to angle A is 24. And on the other side of angle A is your opposite. That would be 7. With SOHCAHTOA, you know that cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Your adjacent is 24, your hypotenuse is 25. Which means if you want to find secant, you do the reciprocal and you're going to flip it. So if we flip it, we get 25 over 24. Coterminal means that you go around the circle and you end in the same spot. So if you're going around the circle, you are adding 360 degrees. Keep in mind, you could go backwards around a circle and you could subtract 360 degrees as well. You get to choose whether you are adding 360 or subtracting 360. You need to use your judgment on which one you're going to do based on the answers. So for example, if we're starting with negative 820, none of my answers are less than negative 820. So I'm not going to subtract. All of my answers are larger than that, so I'm going to add 360. So with your calculator, negative 820 plus 360 degrees, one full lap around the circle, is negative 460. Now, negative 460 is coterminal. That means they end in the same spot if you graph them, but it's not an answer choice. So I'm going to go another lap around the circle, and I'm going to add another 360 degrees. And you get negative 100. That is still not an answer choice. So basically, you're just going to keep adding 360 degrees until you get to an answer. If we did another 360, you get to 260 degrees. So finally, we get an answer choice for what's coterminal. For the next one, they're saying that we have an angle of 117 degrees. Maybe check to see which angle measure is not 117. That's 117. This is 117. This is 117. What's not 117 is this guy. Because your arc is going down and around, this indicates that you have a negative angle measure. And 117 is positive. You should be going up and around. So not choice 2. From there, they're saying that we have a reference angle of theta. So what you have to do is go and find all of your reference angles. If I were you, I would shade in all of the thetas. And if you shade in all of the thetas, you need to know some facts about your reference angles. Okay. So I shaded in all the reference angles, and now you need to know that your reference angles are less than 90 degrees, which means it can't be choice 1 because this angle is more than 90 degrees. You also need to know reference angles touch your x-axis. So if you look at your options that you have, 1 touches the y-axis, this is touching your y, but choice 4 is touching your x-axis. So choice 4 is the correct answer. For the very last one, you want to find the exact value of the coordinates p, a point on the unit circle formed by the angle 225 degrees in standard position. This is a really hard problem. What they're saying is 225 degrees is between 180 and 270. So we are in the third quadrant. This would be 225 degrees. They want to know what's the coordinate of this point right here. And this point is x comma y. But they did tell you it's a unit circle, so your point goes cosine theta comma sine theta. So I'm going to write this as cosine theta comma sine theta. Now, if you think about it, we are in the third quadrant. And in the third quadrant, you have negative x values and negative y values. So both cosine and sine will be negative. What we're trying to find here is negative cosine of, well, never mind, scratch that. So what we have is cosine of 225 degrees. And we have sine of 225 degrees. That is going to be your coordinate. And we know because we're in the third quadrant, we're going to get a negative value for x and a negative value for y. Negative for cosine, negative for sine. 225 degrees is too large to figure out what cosine of 225 is. You need to make it smaller, and that is the purpose of a reference angle. So for your reference angle, we're on the left side, so we're going to compare it to 180. If we went all the way to 225 and we're comparing it back to 180 degrees, that distance is 45 degrees. So your reference angle is 45 degrees. So instead of cosine of 225, you're going to find cosine of 45 degrees. And you're going to find sine of 45 degrees. And this goes back to your 30, 45, 60 chart. You need to remember that cosine of 45 degrees is radical 2 over 2. Sine of 45 degrees is also radical 2 over 2. But because you're in the third quadrant, they are both negative. And that's all. Can I